Okay, so Peter, do you want to kick off with the first question and kind of do the introduction?
Yeah, okay, so I'll just briefly introduce you, Ellen, and then go into my first question. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So hi everybody, and it's really fantastic that today we have Dame Ellen MacArthur with us to help us introduce and launch the national, let me switch my email off.
Notifications off, number 1, if I'm checking mine now. I don't think mine are ever on.
The way things are going, it would be pinging all the time.
Yeah, fine.
Your phone off, Fiona?
Yeah, move it out of the way.
Make sure mine's off. And take 2. Okay. Hello everybody, and welcome to the launch of the National Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Research Programme. And it's a great pleasure today to welcome and introduce Dame Ellen MacArthur. And we've got a number of questions and discussion points that Ellen's going to help us with today. So I'm going to kick off with the first question to you, Ellen. Now, it might be difficult to believe, but there may be some people out there who've never heard of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So could you just give us a little sense of the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation over the past 10 years, some of the progress that you've made and some of the highlights?
Thanks, Peter. So the foundation's been in existence for just over 10 years, and it's been the most phenomenal journey. Our goal is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And 10 years ago, we began by saying we would work in the areas of education, business, and looking at working with governments, because we realized that in order to transition to a circular economy, the only way you can do that is if you change the system. So you can't just do that with business. You can't just do that with education, and you can't just do that with policy through working with government. And I think that's a real key here, especially around the activities of the NICER program. Collaboration has to be right at the forefront. So 10 years ago, we launched with that focus. We were a very small team of people. We're now a team of over 180 people based all over the world. We have programs which run in education. We work with higher education institutes all over the world. We work with businesses, and we have what we call systemic initiatives, where we actually take a global material flow and we switch it from that straight linear line to one which is circular, which is obviously an incredibly complex process. To do that, you work with suppliers, you work with businesses, you work with policy governments to try to make that line shift towards the circle. And it's incredibly complex, but we've learned a lot about how to actually enact systemic change. And again, that comes down to collaboration. You cannot do it without collaboration. You know, the biggest company in the world can't become circular without collaboration, and that's often collaboration with their biggest competitors. And I think that's a really interesting window to enter the circular economy from, because there are some great circular examples, but to do it on your own is almost impossible. So in order to create a circular country like the UK, which is obviously the goal of the NICER program, it really does need to bring everyone together. You need to bring people's heads together, and you need to change the entire system, which involves the entire country and the many different elements of it.
Great. Okay. And I mean, if we just wind forward 10 years from when you first started. So here we are today, as you say, at the launch of the NICER program. And there's a large number of universities, industry partners, and other organizations engaged in the NICER program. And today we hope that many more will join us. So you've given us a bit of an example there of the need for collaboration. Can you perhaps give us a little bit of a flavor of how the academic community engages, and can you give us some idea of the successes? You know, what are the ingredients of success around collaboration?
So I'll give you a non-academic example first, and then I'll go into the academic side. So when we set about looking at the plastic packaging flows globally, we couldn't find the data that looked to the whole of the world. So we set aside a lot of time with McKinsey, and we did a global analysis of where plastic packaging comes from and goes to, and the findings were quite horrific. But we did that in collaboration with many businesses and several governments around the world, and it led into the new plastics economy work, and now the global commitment, which is a joint commitment with the United Nations Environment Programme. Now within that, we now have 25%, over 25% of the global plastic packaging industry signed up to that. And there are also many on the ground programs within countries, the pacts around plastic, to actually unravel this on the ground. So this has now become something which universities and research are involved in very heavily, looking for new materials and different business models. There are many companies globally focused on this, working out how they can transition from that linear plastic flow to that circular plastic flow, and what needs to be designed out, both business model wise and material wise. And then you also have the policy space that sits around that. So that's grown from nothing 5 years ago to being a now international pact involving people all over the world. The global commitment involving businesses all around the world. Finance institutions are heavily involved. We've taken an idea into something which is truly interdisciplinary and has a massive element of collaboration. Within the higher education space, we've seen something similar. We had several links with universities when we launched, very, very, very early days. Now we've seen enormous growth in universities, taking up the idea of the circular economy, and actually particularly in the UK. You know, within the UK, there have been 12 circular economy centres open in the last 4 years, which is, for us, absolutely outstanding. But it's also interesting to see where that circular economy activity is. You know, when we began, it tended to be around business, engineering and design. Now it's way outside that. It's in the behavioural science space, it's in fashion, it sits within finance. You know, there are so many conversations within that learning and research environment, looking in and digging deeper into circular economy. And part of that is the pull from business, because the skills are required to rethink the system. And part of that is the pull from individuals who are looking for a more resilient economy, you know, something that really works in the long term. So from our perspective, the UK really is at the forefront of circular economy further education activity.
Great. Well, we're going to come on to some of those points in some other questions. I'm going to hand over to Fiona for a couple of questions now.
Great, thanks, thanks Peter, and thanks Ellen. I think building on your previous answer around how, you know, it's really important to engage and inspire lots of different stakeholders across the community, including academics, government, industry, and wider society. I think the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has been really successful at doing this, and this is one of the challenges that we'll have to address as the NICER programme. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you have managed to maintain that kind of crisp messaging and fantastic communication.
I think for me, the top line of all of that is the circular economy is a massive opportunity. It's an economic opportunity, it's a design opportunity, it's an opportunity to build a resilient economy in the long term. It's all about what we can do, not what we can't. So from our perspective, that almost sits at the top. Of course, there's the linear to the circular, the take, make, dispose, which turns into that circular regenerative system. But that in itself is a massive opportunity. And then the second thing would be to be really careful with the messaging. It's so easy, and I've done this many times. You drift off into the, you know, management consultant speak that we've used in some of the economic reports, and actually a lot of people can be missed off that understanding of circular economy. You know, circular economy is it's an approach to the way the global economy works. It's looking at that materials backbone and making those materials cycle. This is a very broad opportunity. This is about rethinking business models just as much as rethinking the materials that fit in the system. It's about the design, it's about the distribution, it's about the value chains, it's everything. And trying to keep that as simple as possible for the audiences that it's intended is actually very challenging, but really, really important. Simple, crisp messaging around circularity.
Brilliant, thank you. And then building on that, there are many different schools of thought and perspectives that are associated with the circular economy, you know, spanning from the view that it's just about waste and recycling, the topic of degrowth, resource efficiency, and then all the way through to that really important systems change, as you mentioned. And I just wondered if you've got any advice for us as we navigate through those differing schools of thought.
I think it's really important to keep looking at the big picture, or if you're looking at the big picture, focus in on something specific within the system. So you're kind of doing the microscope, the macroscope, the microscope, the macroscope. Otherwise, you can kind of lose your way in a bit with circular economy. We found with the plastics as an example that we've worked towards a circular economy for plastics with the new plastics economy work we've been doing now for many years. And it would be very quick to jump to the conclusion, this is about recycling plastic. Of course, the recycling of plastic is absolutely part of a circular economy, but it's about building an economy that runs in the long term. So part of it is distribution models, part of it is business models that enable people to have access to products, perhaps without plastic at all. Maybe it's a different material that's created to fit within the biosphere, so it regenerates natural capital and helps to rebuild biodiversity loss. There are many different elements that sit within this, and that's why it's so important to keep looking out. You know, it's not just recycling infrastructure that's going to solve this. Yes, we absolutely need that recycling infrastructure, particularly in emerging markets, else we're never going to build that circular economy. There's got to be many other elements, though, that are focused on upstream innovation, the innovation in materials, the innovation in business models, the innovation in design. And we don't have many of these answers. These are new products, new distribution models, new ways to get products to people. So you have to kind of look at the big picture and then hone in on the details and then look back at the big picture. And that example is just plastic packaging. It could be food and farming. It could be the jeans redesign project and keeping fashion within a system through Make Fashion Circular. There are so many different ways you can look at circular economy. You can take one material stream or one sector and hone right in on it, but you have to keep looking back out at the bigger picture and look at how this can be brought forward. And I guess a great example would be when you look at a washing machine as an example. Today we buy a washing machine, we pay tax, we have it in our house, we own all the materials within it. At the end of its life, it's a problem, it's broken, it's a real pain, you generally can't get anyone to fix it, so you end up getting it to the landfill site where you pay tax again through landfill tax. Within a circular economy, of course, you would design a different machine because you design it to be repairable, you design it to be upgradable. When we bought it, we wouldn't buy it. We'd join a contract, so we'd pay per wash. So actually we don't own it, nor do we own the materials within it. So that changes the design of the product, it changes the financing of the product, it changes the business model that gets the product to us, and it changes all the distribution and the movement of these products. So actually just through redesigning a washing machine, which you could do tomorrow, doesn't solve the problem, because we'd still buy that redesigned washing machine, and when it broke, we probably wouldn't know what to do with it. So you have to change all the elements of the system, and that's where the interdisciplinary nature of circular economy is so, so important.
Great. And I'm going to come with a follow-on question there, Ellen. So, and you focused in on business models and distribution and supply chain. So I'm going to ask you a question about your work with business leaders. So you speak regularly to many of the chief executives and senior executives and managers of many of the world's largest corporates, as well as many other leading organizations. So over the past 10 years, how has that conversation evolved, and what's your view about the work of circular economy in the future and its relevance to business leadership?
I think circular economy is the future of business. We cannot continue to squeeze more profit out of a linear system in the long term. I mean, that's something that cannot be argued with. We have finite resources in a world with a growing world population, so things have to change. And I think everybody initially, when we began those conversations, really did realize that. If you challenge the chief exec to say, where will your business be in 10 years? Where will your business be in 20 years? Actually, a lot didn't have the answers as to what it would look like if it was working as well as it possibly could. And that's what circular economy is you're decoupling economic growth from resource constraints. So you're building a system which is regenerative and restorative. So I would say the early conversations were about challenging the idea of a linear system. And in many ways, it's common sense that linear can't work in the long term. That conversation now has moved on stratospherically. I mean, we were having conversations with individuals. Now we're having conversations with multiple chief execs from some of the biggest competitors in the world on the same call, talking about that systemic change which has to happen to make that sector circular. And that's really important, is they now realize this is not just about what they do within their business. Of course, that's vital. They're building that circular system into their business's infrastructure, within their supply chains, their value chains. Everything has to change, but they can't do it on their own. Take plastic packaging. Coke can't do it on their own. Pepsi can't do it on their own. There needs to be a common understanding of what that circular economy for plastics looks like, so the infrastructure can follow, so the infrastructure can be put in place to make that system work. And that's really, really interesting. That's become a very different conversation with those most senior people from that where we were challenging the linear model 10 years ago. Now we know the linear model doesn't work in the long term. We understand what circular can look like. It's about what levers we need to pull to put that into practice and linking in the right people to make that happen.
Okay, great. And I'm going to switch now from big to small. So small and medium-sized enterprises. So part of the NICER program and a large part of your work is working with many different types of organisations, many of them startups, innovation companies, and as I say, small and medium-sized companies. So can you just tell us about the importance of those companies in your work and in the circular economy, and what are some of the ways in which you try to work with those organisations?
Well, right from the beginning, we've had a real thirst for finding circular activity. And sometimes you find that within a huge organization. Actually, most commonly, we were finding it in the small organizations, the SMEs, these small companies that had really different ideas to run things in a different way, with different materials, to look at distribution in a different way, to look at the sourcing of products in a different way. It's been really, really interesting. I mean, over this 10-year journey, there are 6 SMEs that we've identified in the past and had many conversations with, and they've joined our network. They're all valued now at over $1 billion. So that shows the speed of change of a good idea. And it's not just the SMEs in isolation, but it's the SMEs working with the big corporates. It's often, take a peel, for example, it's a material it's a natural material that covers fruit and vegetables, which keeps it fresh for longer. It's basically a plastic replacement, but it's entirely natural. So you eat it, it's just on the product. Now that's now valued at over $1 billion. Of course, they can only exist through collaboration. They need to collaborate with the buyers of the products to keep them fresh longer so the packaging can change. So you need all of these multi-level conversations. That's why those SMEs are so important, because actually for a huge organization, an incumbent, if you like, who's been working in a linear way for many years, their chief exec might have the most circular dreams for that business and the most circular ambitions. It takes time to turn that ship, even with the best decision makers in the right place. When it comes to a SME, they can kick off like that in a circular way with a great idea. It's very challenging, but it's almost easier in a way to start with that clean sheet of paper. And that's what many of them are doing. And that's why it's absolutely essential for them to have the support that they need and for policy to help them where it can.
Yeah. Great. Back to you, Fiona.
Great, thank you. This is a really important year, obviously, with G7 and COP26 just around the corner. I think that evidencing the link between the circular economy and net zero and global climate challenges has never been more urgent. You've published several recent reports on this topic, and I wondered if you could give us a bit of an overview of some of this work.
Thanks, Fiona. Well, I think there's always that jumping to the conclusion that climate change is all about the emissions of electricity generation and moving from A to B. And obviously that's a huge part of the emissions that we emit globally. It's a massive part. When we looked at what we needed to do to keep on the 1.5 degrees trajectory, if you switch to renewable energy, you can get to about half of that. That switch to renewable transportation gets you to about half of that, but half of that, it isn't touched by the renewable energy transportation. What we need to do is we need to look at the other half, and that's how things are made. It's the embodied energy within materials, within products. And we started to look at an analysis of that half. So of this half that switching to renewables doesn't touch, what does that half look like with regards to where the energy sits? And we took 5 key materials. We took steel, aluminium, cement, food, and plastic packaging. And we said, if you could switch the food systems, the packaging systems, if you could switch those to circular, what effect would that have on this remaining half of emissions that we're currently emitting? And if you change just those 5 sectors, it would cut that by half, roughly half. So we're talking about a significant energy saving, emission saving by changing the system. You know, if you remanufacture something, the amount of energy embedded within it is vastly lower than a brand new product. A remanufactured engine, for example, not that combustion engines will be here in 30 years time, but if you take a remanufactured engine, it has 80% less embodied energy with it and 80% less materials. So suddenly there's this massive changing of the energy demand to create that product if you go back to that remanufactured phase. And that's taking a broken engine. If you can use the technology we have today in everything, in our phones, tracking everything, you know, data is not something we lack currently, and put that into the electric engines of the future and the products of the future. And then that feeds back when a part needs changing before it breaks, those savings can be even higher. So there's a massive opportunity in switching to circularity. And indeed, we won't get to net zero unless we do that.
Great, and you mentioned technology as a key enabler, and G7, the G7 event particularly, and also the UK's industrial strategy puts a key focus on green technology, low carbon recovery and future growth. And I just wondered what you thought the role of circular economy has to play in ensuring kind of that transition towards a low carbon recovery, particularly post pandemic.
I think the COVID pandemic has shown us how brittle our supply chains are. There's been a huge amount of fear, a lot of quick thinking, and some phenomenal work done over the last 18 months to find solutions and to keep us, to keep the countries on the road and keep the food flowing, keep the product coming. It's been very challenging right across the world. So I think building a more resilient economy is fundamentally key. And that is exactly what the circular economy is. It's distributed, it's diverse, it's regenerative, it's restorative, and most importantly, it's resilient. So it plays a key role, not only in reaching climate targets, but in building a resilient and regenerative economy for the future that really can run in the long term. It's well worth putting that investment in.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Peter.
Ellen, you'll be pleased to hear we've got 2 more questions, one from each of us. So, our NICER programme is UK focused, and you have seen and been leading major change in regions and cities and countries across the world, and we've seen lots and lots of progress and lots of really great examples. And one of the objectives of NICER is to develop a UK roadmap within the context of the 5 national centres. And can you give us any sort of insight or thoughts about the potential for the UK economy from the NICER programme, looking at it from your perspective, and any thoughts and advice you can give us about road mapping and looking into the future?
I think it's clear to see from the comments I just made around the regenerative, resilient economy, how important a circular economy is for the UK economy, how it helps with employment, how it helps with the resilience of the economy, why it helps with decoupling economic growth from resource constraints. And I think the UK is at a bit of an inflection point right now. Love or hate Brexit, we're entering a new era and decisions can be made. And I think what the NICER programme really has the opportunity to do is to elevate the circular economy conversation across the country, so that cities have more, they're more even with their knowledge, so that policy can help to skew the economy towards that circular economy for those SMEs and for the larger corporations who are trying to unlock it over here. So I think there are many, many opportunities, but it's ultimately about bringing those science-based studies, getting that information out there, creating that level field, and helping policy steer the economy in the right direction towards that resilient economy that we all hope for.
Brilliant, thank you. And I mean, it's been fantastic to talk to you about some of the work that you've been doing over the last 10 years. And I think certainly the NICER programme wouldn't have the head start that it has without the foundation. I just wondered if you could finish off by thinking about kind of what your plans are for the next 2 and 3 years. What are your priorities? And what would you like to see from the NICER programme over the next 4 years?
Thanks, Fiona. I think the most important objective is to elevate that circular economy conversation across the country from the NICER programme's perspective. What we need to do is elevate the conversation. It's make those policy suggestions. It's collaborating in a way that makes those the right suggestions and can really help to steer the economy towards that regenerative, restorative future that we're all hoping for. And I think from the foundation's perspective, we have a network of businesses and organizations right around the world, including here, obviously in the UK, particularly when it comes to higher education. We are in that same space. The conversation needs to be elevated further. There are some amazing case studies. There are some great examples, and there are some superb systemic initiatives that we're working on. Food and cities, make fashion circular, the new plastics economy. There's a massive conversation going on globally now around financing the circular economy and measuring the circular economy. These are all topics we're working on very hard and very fast. But ultimately, it's about elevating that conversation. And I would say we're on exactly the same journey from that point of view. We need to take the conversation to the next level. We need to make this as real as we possibly can. And most importantly, we need to do it as fast as possible.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen, and we really appreciate you joining us on this conversation, and we will continue to continue the conversation with you over the next 4 years, we hope. So thank you very much, and I'm sure everybody out there has really appreciated and valued your ideas, and would appreciate everything you've done over the past 10 years to get us to this point in the journey. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Peter. This is very much a team game, so we look forward to working with you in the coming years. And thank you for all the work that you guys have been doing in this space. It really makes a massive difference.